Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. I'm Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, starting with Michael R. Fletcher.
Hello, I am Michael R. Fletcher, co-author of Norilska Groans and author of some other stuff.
And Rob J. Hayes.
Hi, I'm Rob J.
Roger
Hayes.
Hayes.
I'm the author of Spirits of Vengeance and a whole slew of other books.
Many books. Dirk cannot join us for this episode, but he will be back for future episodes. Rob is holding up a little Dirk figurine. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can check it out on the channel. It's kind of like a muscular version of Dirk Ashton with like some
Dirk's
absolutely...
He's totally pumped like that now.
It's actually a pop doll of Alexander Armstrong from Full Metal Alchemist, but kind of looks a bit like Dirk.
Yeah, sure. He's bold, has a massive handlebar moustache. Can totally see the resemblance. So today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that Mike was bringing up off air a few episodes ago, which is when is a book done? So when do you say that a book project is finished? Like, how do you decide when it's time to stop editing and publish something? And kind of also throughout each of the various drafts, when are you sort of saying that each draft is done and ready to move on to the next stage? So Mike,
when you're so sick of it that you can no longer, just stomach the idea of reading through it again.
That's kind of actually it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can, every time you do an editing pass, you will find something.
Yes.
And I'll do 8 or more editing passes of different flavors, sometimes word tightening, sometimes plot stuff, sometimes tweaking character voice. But at the end, you could just keep reading through it over and over and over again and tweaking. Oh, this sentence is slightly tighter. And at some point, you just you give up. And Rob's exactly right. Like you keep going until you hate the book and everything about it and want to end yourself. And then you pass it on to your editor.
It's really easy to lose perspective as well, because you will keep finding things to do to it, because the more you read through it, the more you will hate it, and the more you'll think, this is trash, I need to change things.
Yeah,
it's not true. It's just that's the way you start feeling after you've read through it, half a dozen times or whatever, because you've read through, you wrote it, you were in it the entire time you wrote it, and then you read through it like 6 times, probably in pretty close succession. You're gonna hate it. It's like, you might absolutely love Lord of the Rings, but if you watch Lord of the Rings back to back 6 times, you'll probably get to the point where you're like, enough.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing about editing, is the losing perspective that comes from just being exposed to your own work like over and over and over again. And one of the things I kind of try to do to avoid that, which is perhaps we can talk about some strategies for that, because I think that is useful for telling when a book is done, are things like, giving it to your editor, getting the feedback of someone who isn't yourself, taking some time away to write a different project or read or watch some different things. And another one, which is a bit more kind of a hack, is even things like changing the font that you're writing and reading in. I find that to be tremendously useful for kind of fooling my brain into thinking that I'm reading a different story. If I write the thing in, I don't know, Courier or whatever, change it to Times New Roman, and it's still the same story, but just the visuals of it are a little bit different, and that kind of helps me see it differently. I don't know
but also you write in Courier?
Yeah, what the fuck is wrong with you? That's completely, what are you, a barbarian?
Courier is great because you can only
Times
fit
New
like
Roman
200
or Garamond
words.
if you're fancy, then maybe that's allowable. Courier, no, sorry.
Yeah, get that old school typewriter feel. No, Courier is awesome because
he's Australian. He's all backwards and stuff.
Yeah.
We only have one font over here, actually. So
the font trick
not so much a choice.
Is actually a great one. I cranked the size up to like 14 and turned the entire book into a Comic Sans.
Oh God.
And read it that way. And it's like, holy shit, you catch some different stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hilarious, but
you'll also give any designer that knows about it a heart attack. Because
you got to change it back before anyone else sees it.
Yeah, Comic Sans is a dirty phrase. Let's be fair.
Yes, not one of the best.
Reading out loud is a good one though.
Another one with reading out loud, if like me, your voice just gets sore after doing that for a while, is like text to speech programs. So you can highlight it and get like an AI voice to read out your manuscript. And it can be really good because they can read it faster than you can generally read out loud. And you can just pause it and change things when you want to edit it. I found that really useful with some previous projects.
That's fair. I've tried that. I found it much more useful for picking up typos or whatever, but less useful for sort of thinking about how I want to make a change to it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But reading out loud myself was a lot more useful for sort of like, oh, I think this would sound a bit better. And also very useful for making dialogue sound more realistic if you're actually sort of like reading it out and almost acting it yourself. Of course, this is more editing than when is a book done, really.
Well, it kind of ties back to it, right? Because in order to know when a book is done, you need to have a clear picture of its quality, which is difficult to get as well. To what extent do you guys on this topic like sort of pick a arbitrary date that you need to stop writing by? Because I find that is useful for me as well. You don't do it?
I never do that.
You never do that?
I think my base rule is, so every time I do read throughs, a part of what I do is, when I'm writing, I leave a lot of comments in Word for myself of stuff to fix, right? And so each time I do a read through, I'm fixing those comments, but often I'll end up leaving new comments, but I won't address those on that pass. So I'm leaving comments for my next pass, right? Because, in that current pass, I'm sort of focused on shit that's already there. And so it's when I can do an entire pass and not leave a comment, and there are no comments in the document, I'm kind of like, all right, this might be ready.
That's a good one.
It happens when it happens. Like,
yeah, I guess I'm wary of, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Parkinson's law, but it's that saying that work expands to fill all time available for its completion. And I certainly have noticed in the past with outlining phases of a project, if I say I'm just going to outline a project, I can just outline forever and never start writing. But as soon as I go, okay, I've been outlining this thing for a few weeks, I'm going to give myself another 2 weeks, and then I'm going to start writing. And whatever I have then, that's my outline. That to me just kicks off these other creative aspects of my brain where all of a sudden these new ideas come because of that pressure and knowing that, oh, you've got to start writing in 2 weeks. So you better actually figure out the things that you haven't sorted with your outline yet. And with endings, that can also sometimes be quite useful as well, just to kind of like motivate yourself to cram in. And even if you blow past that deadline as well, for me at least, I often find that I've gotten closer to that endpoint just by setting kind of like an arbitrary, end date for it. But everyone's process is a bit different. So that's interesting that you guys just sort of let it go until it's more of an intuitive finish.
Although hiring your artist to do a cover before the book is finished also kind of is a little kick in the ass to finish the thing, because you're like,
very true,
I need to sell this so I can afford to pay my artist.
Yes, that's a good point.
Or, as is currently happening, because Felix has a massive waiting list, hiring a cover artist before you've even started the book.
Hey.
Yeah, I've got him working on character sketches for a book I'm still world building. Like, haven't written word one of actual book yet. But I've sent him a bunch of notes on character sketches and stuff. Yeesh.
Are you doing internal art for that book?
Yeah. So for there's the last Obsidian book, he's got, I think, 8 character sketches he's doing for me. And I'm doing the same thing with the next one, which will be the first book in something entirely new. Because it's a little crazy, I kind of I want to help put some visuals in the characters in the reader's brain, because readers are just characters to me.
No one's real. They're all figments.
They're all figments of your imagination. Wait, does that mean you're buying your own books?
Yeah, this explains why I'm broke.
Yeah. This money is a closed loop system.
He's pulling himself up by his bootstraps.
So actually, back on topic for a second.
Yes.
We've all written a couple of books. Do you find it increasingly difficult to do as many editing passes as maybe you should? Like, I remember, like, the first books, I would do, God, like an insane number of editing passes. And it was like, oh, it must be perfect. And by book 10, it's kind of like, hey, I think it's there. And I'm like, maybe I'm hoping that I'm a better writer, and so it needs less. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But I find it, I'm kind of quicker to go like, okay, let's fucking move on.
Me too, Rob? For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, I know that when I wrote my debut, I must have edited that book about 20 times. It was insane. Like I'd read it, like I'd read through it and a whole bunch of times. Then I wrote the sequel. Then I went back and read through book one and did more edits. And then I wrote the third one and went back. It's too much. But these days, I'm definitely a bit quicker to sort of just like move on. And I think part of that is because it's the business side of things as well. I'm more eager to, I need to get this book out so I can start writing another one. So I can then, publish that book in this year. Because as an indie author, you're regularly told, and it is true to a degree, that if you're not releasing a book, you're dead. You're a shark.
It's swimming.
It's
Otherwise you drown.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly because Amazon does things like front end new releases, basically. So yeah, there is a degree of you need to keep releasing books, and when you're trying to make a living out of it, an actual business out of it, you're sort of like, well, shit, I do actually need to release this book at some point, and the sooner the better. So yeah, it's entirely possible that for me, books aren't getting as many editing passes as they used to. That doesn't mean I'm skimping down completely. I'm still sort of like, each book I release, I've read through, I don't know, 6 to 8 times at least.
Yeah, I would say like, first book took a year to write, spent a year editing, like literally no idea how many passes it was. Got it to an editor, spent another year sort of fixing it. Blackstone Heart, which is arguably a much better book, I wrote in 3 months and then edited for 3 months and put it out.
Yeah, it's crazy how quicker you get. I think also you just become, like, as you said, you become a better writer, and also you probably become more aware of the diminishing returns of multiple editing passes. Like there's a point at which, the difference in your manuscript from first draft to second draft might be like 30% improvement. But when you get from like 5th draft to 6th draft, it's probably only a couple of percentage points, a couple of prose tweaks here and there, and it maybe doesn't add a heap to your story.
Yeah. The vast majority of readers are entirely unaware of prose. If you've got a good story and the voice is there for them, they're not going to notice if you tightened the odd sentence here and there. Like a few will, but most people, I mean, these I was about to start slagging other writers. That's a mistake. These people are reading other people who Rob, take it away.
Well, I think to back up your point here, I think like ultimately what matters in a story is like, the characters, are they interesting? Do you want to spend time with them? Is the plot fascinating? Is the world interesting? And then everything else beyond that is, like set dressing to make it prettier. In the same way that you could have, like you wouldn't want a film that is shot with the most amazing cameras, the most amazing cinematography, but is a garbage screenplay. But you would be totally fine with something that is a really, amazing screenplay, not the best filming. Like maybe it's a bit grainy, maybe the audio is not that great. Like you look at something like Reservoir Dogs, right? Like amazing screenplay. The cinematography, is it incredible? It's okay, but like, there's flaws with it. It's like very echoey. It's in this warehouse, but who the hell cares? Because the script is so incredibly good and the characters are so interesting. So I think it's just being aware of what ultimately the appeal is of your story. And there are certainly some genres, to provide sort of a counter argument to that, where the prose is one of the more important aspects. Like in literary fiction, there's probably more attention put to prose than to things like a really suspenseful plot. But in things like fantasy, I feel like it's more about the plot, the world, the characters. And then if your prose is great, then that's a bonus as well. But by no means is it, the main thing that is drawing readers to your story, unless you're writing The Name of the Wind, in which case it's totally different.
Yeah. I also feel it's a lot about the way that you sort of like you'll edit a book as well. I have a feeling that Mike works the same way that I do. I'm not sure about you, Jed, but I write a book, and with each editing pass, I tend to add more. Just more goes into the book. But I know plenty of people who they'll complete a first draft of the book, and it'll be like 250,000 words, and they'll be sat there going, I need to cut 80,000 words from this. And that's what their editing passes are, just constant cutting bits out. Here, what can what can I take out? Which bit can I just ruthlessly get rid of to make it into this number of words? And if that's why you're doing it, then you hit your specified word count of 160 or whatever, and that's probably when it's ready to publish, if that's the way you do it. But yeah, for me, it's, if I keep editing, I will keep adding more, because there's always like another character interaction I could add in, or another bit of world building, or some cool little bit of exposition that doesn't generally fit, but I can maybe find a way to shoehorn it in. So it's, yeah, knowing when to stop is kind of like when I get to the point where I'm just like, ooh, I wonder if I could just find somewhere to add this bit in. That can be a good way to say, okay, at this point, I'm just trying to add more into it rather than thinking this just fits naturally.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. I mean, how many times do you write something, you're reading through your edit, and you go, oh, this should happen. And you write that scene, and then you keep reading and that scene happens. You actually thought of it the first time and wrote it. And it's so close. Like, you're like, not quite word for word, but you've already written that stupid scene. You're like, fuck.
Just forgot about it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool when that happens.
Delete
right?
all this extra shit you wrote.
Yeah, I do it with like dialogue or whatever sometimes as well. I'm like, oh, this is a really cool line, so I'll be like, I'll add this line, and it's really cool. And then 2 pages on, it's like the character says the same line. I'm like, fuck. I'm gonna go back and find that other line and delete it because I already said it. Defeated
by your past self, Rob. No, I think that's super satisfying when that happens, though, because it means that you were on the right track the first time around. If you had the same thought coming back to a particular scene that you did the first time around, that
just means you're predictable.
Really good. What's that?
Just means you're predictable.
Yeah, well, that as well. That could definitely be a factor.
Or it means you've really nailed the voice of the book and the character.
Let's go with that one then.
Rob, with your point about how you tend to add to subsequent edits. I remember with the first draft of Across the Broken Stars, it came in at about 60,000 words. And I went to myself, that's way too short for the kind of, epic fantasy thing that I wanted to write. So I ended up adding, I think, about 20,000 words to it when I was doing the editing, just whole essentially side things that I had not even, put down in the original outline or whatever. And that was actually a super satisfying process, because it means that you can go back into that world again and just dig a little deeper into some character interactions and add some missing building blocks to a certain character arc that wasn't there, which I think is a satisfying way to look at on the topic of expanding a book that's too short. Maybe that could be a good episode to do in the future, actually, is how do you expand a book that's too short, or how do you cut down a book that's too long, which sounds like, based on our off-air conversations, more of the problem at the moment.
No. To be honest, if we're going to talk about how to cut down a book that's too long, I think we need a guest on, because I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. So back to the topic of, which I realize we haven't talked about, of when a book is done. What are some other kind of indicators, or what does your process look like for kind of wrapping up a story? Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned so far?
I kind of tie it to reader feedback. So when the majority of the reader feedback is, fuck yeah, this is awesome, then I know it's probably at least pretty close. And I like to do usually 2 rounds of beta reads. So I'll finish the book, do a half dozen editing passes until I think it's done. I'll send it off to betas. I get their feedback. If everyone's saying the same thing, then you really have to listen. And if one person, says something but nobody else catches that, you got to give it a little thought, but it's maybe not critical. Once I've gone through and sort of dealt with any feedback that I think needs being dealt with, I'll do a second round of beta reading with test readers. And if it comes back from them and, everyone seems sort of happy and no one's catching glaring errors, at that point, I'll probably do another pass or 2 of editing and then send it off to my editor for real editing.
How many beta readers are you using
after
these days?
that as well?
I try and use 3 or 4 beta readers for each pass.
Okay.
Finding more than that's a pain in the butt, and
Mm.
it's really difficult to find a good reader. Either there are two kinds that I'm seeing. One is they go like, "Oh my god, that's so awesome! I love this book." You're like, "Cool," not helpful. And the other one is somebody sends back like an entire book of notes
Yeah.
and has tried to write extra chapters for you. You're like, "Nice. I can't use any of that, and I'm not even going to read it." And you've sent me so much, I'm actually not going to read any of it.
It's a
And you
fine
just
line.
trash that. Finding someone in between who can like see the story and yet catch plot holes and not sort of get caught up in it it's a rare skill.
Just sort of, yeah, someone who can offer useful bits of criticism or advice on things that can be changed or should be changed, things that work or didn't work without going overboard or underboard. Because it is true. Somebody who comes back and literally just says, "Oh my god, the best thing in the world," it's just like, that's great, but it's not, and it's not useful.
Yeah, and the
I
real
love your
butt.
enthusiasm, and once the book's done, feel free to post that as a review.
Yes.
Yeah. Writers make awesome beta readers. Unfortunately, they're all busy writing their books, and nobody has time to read your shit. And you can't even, yes, you can get angry at them, but it's unrealistic. But I'm still angry at them.
What you need
Decide
is
your fucking projects and focus on mine.
No, Mike, what you need is a writer
book.
who's struggling from
Write it. I can't read it as well.
You need to seek out a writer who's struggling from intense writer's block and will look for any excuse to avoid that. And then you give them your manuscript and you're good. That's the solution.
Yeah. All right. I will hunt for broken writers.
Yes. All right. I think
I'm sure you'll find a few, just put out a call on Twitter. Is any writer here broken? Oh God, it's gone viral.
Pretty much. Yes. Hopefully we don't fall into that category in the future ourselves. But anyway, that was a good episode. Thanks for suggesting that, Mike. Just a quick shout out to some of our patrons as well. Shout out to Christopher, Tom, Daniel, and Steve, and special extra shout out to our high tier patrons, Christopher and Daniel. If you want to help support the show and help us continue in the future, please go ahead and head to patreon.com/Wizards Warriors Words. The link to that is also in the show notes down below. And in exchange for a small monthly donation to the show, you can get things like free advanced reader copies from us of our upcoming books, editorial feedback, ad-free versions of the episode, and some other cool stuff as well. So check that out if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying the show, feel free to share this with some of your writer friends or writer communities that you're in, whether they are just friends in person. Bonus points if you just jam a pair of headphones on your friends and force them to listen to this episode in its entirety.
It's like the torture methods of old, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, whatever it does to kind of spread the message. For legal purposes, that was a joke. But for practical purposes, you know what to do. If you don't want to do that, your alternative is you can always share it on the Twitters, the Reddits, or the Facebooks, or wherever else writers are hanging out these days.
I believe it's called Meta these days.
The Meta. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. Zuckerberg is monetizing all forms of human interaction and emotion now. Good times. But they have Ray-Ban sunglasses, so good times. Anyway, that's a whole different other thing to discuss. But thank you everybody for listening or watching to this episode, and we will see you next week for another one. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Goodbye.